So welcome to everybody. I see one or two faces that I recognise, which is very lovely and unexpected. Another two people coming in. There we go. So we're going to be looking at, this is a short and partial history of the church. It's covering about 13 sessions, roughly twice a month. Please keep an eye on the dates if you hope to come to them all, because it's not all, it's not exactly fortnightly. So just keep an eye on the dates. And I think there will be a link available of a recording for any that you miss. I think the sessions, well, I know the sessions are being recorded, so I assume they are being made available. I'm not sure how that's being managed. Somebody had put in the chat, they're glad that this is being organised and that they're not doing it. I feel much the same. This is not being organised by me. The organising of it is by those who are involved with Heart Edge, and they, I assume, will also be making available links and so on, but I will certainly find out more about that and work out how to do that as we go through the weeks. But the theme for Heart Edge this year is Humbler Church, Bigger God. And that seemed a good place to start when thinking about church history, because the danger of doing church history and not having this kind of an overarching theme for it is that we put too much emphasis on the church and not enough on God. So I'm hoping that as we go through this, we will keep this theme in mind and be able to work with it as we develop and explore. Somebody has just asked if there are going to be notes available. There will be handouts available as of next week. This week is such a general introduction. I thought it was going to be difficult to put handouts together, but there will be handouts with dates and various things available as of, not next week, next session. Is that okay? And let's just, I thought I'd start just quickly introducing myself. My name is Ruth Gouldbourne. I'm a Baptist minister. I was working out today with somebody. I've been a Baptist minister now for over 30 years, which is really quite not distressing. I love it. It's distressing in terms of age. It's about 34 years now. I'm a passionate but also a partial historian, and you will discover my partialities as we go through. But I'm also well aware that I'm not a full-time historian, so I'm partial in that sense as well. That there will be bits I don't cover. I'm an exiled Scot, which you can probably tell from my accent. I currently live just outside Manchester. I minister in a church in a town called Cheadle Hulme. We're just to the southeast of Manchester, and we come under the Greater Manchester Authority, which has meant that during lockdown we've been in special measures at various times when other parts of the country were opened up. But we are gradually opening up, and life feels a bit more wider than it has done for quite a while. But who am I is a basic question of this survey of church history, really. That's behind a lot of this. What does it mean to be a member of this ongoing community of the church? And who is this church that we're part of? So I hope that as we go through the survey, understanding something of the church and the way in which it has taken on the shape it now has will help you understand who you are within it and how you exist within it, how you relate within it. Sorry, while I'm still admitting people here, so I'm getting slightly distracted at times. I thought I might be just worth at the beginning. Oh, good, Lena, I'm glad you've got sound. Just to say what we're not going to do. Church history is a vast topic. I must confess, I was saying to a friend who's a very serious historian, I'm doing the entire history of the church in 6 months, and he just raised his eyebrows at me, and I thought, yeah, that's probably needs some narrowing down. There are ancient churches in Africa and India, which we are simply not going to be able to touch. They have a history all of their own, actually starting from the same roots, but going off in different directions very, very early on. So we're going to acknowledge that they're there and that we're really not going to be able to tell anything of their story. We're not really going to tell much of the history of Orthodoxy. So the vast expanse of Russian and Greek Orthodoxy, the division comes in about the the 10th century, but it starts earlier than that and it becomes hardened, and we haven't got the space, and I certainly don't have the knowledge to touch on that. We won't be looking at in great detail at developments in Roman Catholicism following the Reformations, and certainly following the Vatican Councils. We will touch on them and we'll acknowledge they were there, and we will say a little bit about them, but we won't be going into great detail with them. We won't really do much on the global south and the developing churches now, because there's a huge thing to be said there about the way in which churches have been developing. Nor will we say much about Australasia, except insofar as those churches are shaped by those who move from Western Europe to colonize. Nor the Eastern churches, by which I've hit the wrong button there, by which I mean back, there we go. The churches, the Coptic churches and so on, we're not really to touch on them in any great detail.
Okay.
And there was another one I think we weren't going to touch on in much detail. Very beginnings of the Pentecostal movement. We'll cover the very beginnings of the Pentecostal movement, but again, that's a growing movement with its very much of its own history, and would take more than we have the resources to do it in our time. Thank you, Kate. Kate is pointing out that if anybody needs, there will be a live as you can see, the live transcript is available, and you can save it at the end, which will give you something in the way of notes as we go along. So that's all the stuff we're not going to do, but I thought I would get that out of the way first. But why look at the history of the church? Now, you will all have different reasons for being here, I'm sure. And it would have been interesting had there not been quite so many of us to talk about why we might be doing this. I hope later on we might have time to get into groups and you will be able to talk together about why you're interested in the history of the church and what the particular questions are that you bring to it. And having said all the stuff I'm not going to do, I will say at this point, if in those groups, if certain things it becomes clear that those are particular issues that people really want to deal with, it is worth emailing me. I don't promise to cover them, but if you email me, I'll give you my email at the end. I might be able to, if not address them directly, point you in directions that would help you to find the resources. It might help you to look at it. But looking at the history of the church, I think is bigger than simply the story and the fact. It has a meaning all of its own. When I was learning church history at the very beginning, the person who my tutor had three maxims that he used to recite regularly as we went through the course. And the first one, this was the one he said to us almost every week, and he specializes in early church historian. You master the first 4 centuries of the church, nothing that happens will surprise you. You get hold of those first 400 years. He then went on later to tell us, when you learn the story of the people of God, you become convinced that the church is God's activity, or it would never have survived. And then his final statement to us as we finished our course, how it is not how it was, and so it is not how it has to be. And I just wanted to take, and then the one we've just begun to touch on, our family history. Who am I and who are we when we're joining together in the church? So I just wanted to take these almost in reverse order, really, and talk about why I believe this is important. How it is not how it was, and so is not how it has to be. I think really matters because we all have a different, sorry, somebody's still joining. We all have different experiences of being within the church, or not being within the church, or no longer being within the church. And nobody's experience of church is perfect. And you know the maxim that if you find, sorry, my name is Ruth Gouldbourne. Somebody's asking my name. I put it up at the front, on the first slide, but I probably put it up too fast. I will come back to it again. But my name is Ruth. Yes, the church is. Oh, the person I was quoting. Oh, he's died now. His name is Alec Chain. Thank you. His name was Alec Chain. He was professor of church history at New College in Edinburgh. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So yes, our experience of church is complex, and you know the maxim that if you find a perfect church, you don't join it because then it's no longer perfect. But church history is a reminder and an exploration of how we've got it wrong and how we've got it right. And it's the reminder that renewal and redemption can happen even out of disaster and the awful mistakes that we make. But it's also the reminder that how we are now is not how we have always been. The church has done things differently in the past and therefore has changed. And if we are in a position now where we think things may need to change, this, if you like, is a resource for saying change is possible, change can happen. How it is not how it was. So it's not how it has to be. And things can be rearranged, rediscovered, renewed. God can work. And that I think takes us to to learn the story of the people of God is to become convinced that the church is God's activity, or it would never have survived. And I think this speaks directly to this theme of humbler church, bigger God. Because the study of church history, it really is a study in humility. It is so often messy. It is so often painful. It is so often very, very confused. As we look back and try and understand what people thought they were doing, the confusion that people seem to have existed in is a reminder of the fact that we can get very confused, and we can get very confused ourselves. And church history at its best, at its most creative, helps us to be better because it keeps us humble. And sure, there are moments of glory. There are times when things are wonderful and we look at amazing saints, and they're not always the people we would expect. And we see people doing wonderful things and achieving heights of devotion and service and care and worship that we can only dream of. But we also look back and we see people doing things that make us go, how did you think that was a good idea? The most obvious example might be the Crusades. Why would you think that was a good idea? Now, in the context of its time and its theology, it might be understandable, but that still doesn't mean that it was a good idea. And yet the church is still here, and yet God is still working, and yet people are still, sorry, somebody else arriving, people are still brought into faith, life is renewed, people are still served, God is still at work. And I think in those days when we are aware of our own failings as a church, it is reassuring to be part of the history of the church and reflect that if God could work through them, God can probably work through us as well. Or perhaps if God can work through me, perhaps God was working through them, even when I can't see it so clearly. There are periods of glory, but there are also dark times, and there are times when we think, how could that ever have seemed like a good idea? Leave aside the times when you know people didn't think it was a good idea, they were just being bad. It's the times when people thought it was right and they do something awful that does make us question it. And then the first 4 centuries, sorry, there we go. If you master the first 4 centuries, nothing that happens will surprise you. The first 4 centuries roughly covers what we call the patristic period. We'll look at just a little bit more next week when we talk about the church fathers. But really what happens in the first 4 centuries is that's when the church is finding its sort of basic grammar, its basic language, the technical terms, the concepts, arguing through, experimenting, weighing things up, trying to make sense of this new faith. It's also the time when Christians move from having been a small sect, persecuted, underground, unimportant, right through to being the dominant force and the approved religion of the Roman Empire, with all the power and all the structure that comes with that. So it's also a period of experimenting with how to do this stuff, and a whole range of options being tried out. How to exist as this small hidden sect, how to find some form of mission that can work when you're being persecuted, how to live when you actually begin to attain power, how to read the scriptures when you've moved rapidly from being excluded to being at the center of things. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on in there. And I think once you begin to get an outline of that, I hope, at least for some of you, it'll be a time of going into other studies on the early church and discovering that there's nothing new. Okay, Lydia's had to leave. Lydia, we hope your daughter is going to be okay. There's nothing new. We have done it all before. Now, that's not to say things don't change. I'd say they do. But there are themes and there are patterns and there are ideas that keep re-emerging. And one of the things that we're doing, particularly looking at the very early days, is working out how did people work this out? What were the questions they were asking? What were the answers they came up with? And how do we then live with them? But that then leads on to another issue around studying church history. And that's to do with church and culture. Is there such a thing as a pure church? That if we could just uncover it all, we could get back to what it ought to really be. We could strip away all the accretions of culture, of language, of philosophy, and so on. And could we get back to something that's really what church is? Which is another way of asking, does church have a history? Or does church exist and get passed on through history? And I think that this really is a question about what does the incarnation have to say about history? I mean, we could sort of take a caricature approach that says the church was delivered perfect and it's been downhill ever since. And we could say that, and we sometimes do in the way that we tell the Christian story. We tell that, we almost seem to say that about creation. It was perfect. Then there was a fall, it's been downhill ever since. And there's a mindset that can take that into the study of the church. And therefore, what we're about in church history is to uncover or to disinter or excavate the pure church. If we could just get back to that, everything would be absolutely fine. Because, and that approach, that perception argues that actually the church or the faith has no history. It is ahistorical. And our duty, therefore, is to strip away everything that's historical or cultural, so on, and get to the pure essence of the faith and just work with that. Of course, the danger of that is it's just inhuman. It's disconnected from the world in which we actually live. And we've just celebrated Christmas. We've just celebrated the festival of the Incarnation. And that's about a human life in a human society at a particular time, particular place, particular culture. Jesus spoke a particular language. He walked on particular streets. He lived in particular villages. He was not ahistorical. And if the church is, as Scripture claims it is, the body of Christ, it is also not ahistorical. It exists within history. And faith and its language and its practice are always encultured. They always exist in and through a culture. So rather than rather than there sort of being a kernel, and if you crack the nutshell and take it off, and you then have the pure of crack the shell of history or of culture, of language or what have you, take it away and you then have the pure nut of the church. I think rather it's like onions. You know, if you peel off layers of onions, you keep peeling off all the layers, you end up with nothing. And that would be the danger if we start taking off culture and language and history from the church. We'd end up with nothing, because it exists in and through the cultures that we have. There is a faith, there is a practice that's handed on, and it can be distorted, it can be misshaped, but dehistoricizing it also distorts it. Now, the whole debate about church and culture is a whole other course, but we do need to notice it when we're starting to study church history. We do need to think about what approach are we bringing to this? And it is like creation. We can think of creation as something that's over and done with. God has created the world and we now live in it and do right or wrong by it. Or is creation something that ongoing? God is working in and through the created order, in and through our lives. God is still at work. God is still part of what is going on. And similarly, the church. Is it something that was given to us and we make or mar it? Or is it something through which the Spirit is still present, through which the Spirit is still working, through which we are still as immediately present to the Spirit as were the first disciples, as were the medieval believers, as were the reformers, or as were the 19th century new thinkers? It is to do with, let me just, so the approach that we're bringing to church history is going to really matter. Are we coming to church history expecting to find a pure church that we can then discover outside of its culture, extract, honour, pass on? Or are we coming to it expecting and exploring ways in which God is working in and through our current culture, our current history, and indeed other people's current culture and history, and the way in which they explored their faith, and they encountered their, thank you, Deborah, the way in which other people explored their faith and the way in which they encountered God in their context. Now, I told you I was a partial historian. You will have seen my partiality in that. But what I would like to do is put you into groups for just, let me just check the time. Put you into groups for about 10 minutes to talk about how you understand the nature of the church in its culture, and how you see the theme of humbler God, bigger church relating to the study of church history. And I'm aware that I'm about... Welcome back, folks. Nice to see that almost everybody's come back, which is always reassuring. I wondered if people would like to put... Yes, if you're not... I've tried to mute everybody, but not everybody is muted. Could you please make sure that you are muted? I wondered if you might... if people would like to put into chat some of the responses that people were coming up with, so we can share them a bit. Yes, I think that issue about that Jesus was not part of the church. Jesus was part of a Jewish culture, a Palestinian culture, a Roman Empire culture, and that's an important thing to understand in that. Yeah. We can't separate church from culture. Yes, I think that's true. Oops. Yes, if any groups have a representative who would like to summarize, that would be helpful. The idea of what is church, I think, has been important, and that is a huge question, and it's one of the big questions that we'll deal with, particularly in looking at the patristics, but it comes up over and over again. Who's in the church and who isn't in the church is partly about what you think the church is. Yeah. Okay, an interesting difference between people who come for a history of church and those who come to learn the history of the culture in which church develops its theology. Be interesting to see what you make of what we do and how we do it in that case. Yeah. Church and Act sounds appealing and immediate and successful. But how long did it stay like that? I think one of the questions, because it falls out quite quicker. It falls apart quite quickly from that point of view. Dissatisfaction with churches now history might help us go forward. That I hope will happen. Yeah. Not being too busy being church that we might lose sight of the bigger picture. I think that's a really helpful insight into we can get so hung up on stuff that actually doesn't matter to anybody else. Differences in denominations, mutual respect. I think as we're starting within still the week of prayer for Christian unity, I think that's a helpful one to reflect on. Church has had a good impact, less impact now. I think that's very true, and we'll certainly cover that towards the end of the course when we look at the ways in which what we might call secularization has become part of Western culture, but not in all parts of the world. People in community building and art, yes. Humble church as a listening church in a culture of conflict. That's a lovely insight. Yeah. Regeneration of creation. Bible as a pure source, but more emphasis on the Gospels. Okay. Yeah. And then you have an interesting discussion then around the history of Scripture and the history of the church and which comes first and which determines which. So it's actually quite certain, it is the church that decides, or the church that shaped the Scriptures as we now have it, and chose the books, as it were, under the guidance of the Spirit. And so how do you relate those two? What's the difference between church history and Christian history? Same difference between social history and cultural history. Could be, I'm not sure of the difference between social history and cultural history. So I think that's something we might want to talk through. Those are not terms that I'm familiar with in this context. There's a lot of questions in there, and my guess is we're not going to answer them all. But I hope we might at least give some context to some of them. People hark back to what they perceive to be a golden era. I'm just going to touch on that. Yes, that's important. Church is shaped by culture, but where we have many traditions and cultures all worshipping the same God in different ways, it is humbling. God is bigger than the church. Yeah, that's I think is a really helpful way of linking humble church, bigger God to the reflection on history. Thank you. That sounds like it's been. Oh, there's another one. Oh, economic culture. Okay, yeah. The relationship of church to economic culture is a really one.
I'll try and rejoin it.
Issue of relating to other faiths, and I think particularly the early church history helps us around that, because of course the early church existed in a context of many faiths. Folks, thank you very much for that feedback. I will try and hold on to it and see if it feeds into some of our future sessions. Somebody there mentioned the issue around a golden age, and I certainly wanted to some unhelpful reasons to study church history, to prove a point or to reconstruct a golden age. There is a tendency always to look back to when the church was better and did things properly, and if we just got back to that or did what they did and then you get to pick your period. Of course, it might be the early church, or it might be the medieval church, or it might be the Reformation church, it might be the pre-Civil War church in England. Well, if we got back to that golden age, it would be right. Well, two issues with that. There's one, of course, you can't go back, and the second is there is no golden age. Let's just be clear about that. Not even in Acts. I mean, the Acts church has all sorts of things going for it, but it also has Ananias and Sapphira. And people even then were messing up, getting things wrong, falling out. And it only takes a cursory reading, I think, of Paul's letters to realise what struggles there were going on in the churches then. There has been no golden age. And again, just looking back a little bit to Christmas, I was listening to somebody bemoaning the fact that Christmas has become secularized, and then realized that what they were doing was quoting in the 4th century. The 4th century, people were complaining that that Christmas was only just beginning to be celebrated at that point, but it was becoming secularized and too much of the world and not enough of the church. So we've had this argument all the way through. There is no golden age. There is only the age we're in. And we have to live in it. And it is very unhelpful to study church history with the hope that we might discover the golden age and get to it. It is also not altogether helpful to study church history with what, again, a former colleague of mine used to call temporal condescension. That is to show how much better we are than then. To look back and say, well, of course, they got it all wrong, or they got lots of things wrong, and we have begun to get it right, and to try and demonstrate that we are the culmination of all good things that the church might be. If a golden age never happened, and if we can't look back, and I don't think we can look back actually to say, because they did it then, we should do it now, because the church culture, the fact that church is in culture makes that a very difficult thing to do. That they did it then doesn't mean the same thing as us doing it now, whatever it is, because the culture, the mindset, the ideas are so very different. Similarly, it is very risky to look back and say, but they were so wrong. Now, that doesn't mean we don't get to say, this was wrong, I do not understand how the church could do this. But it does mean when we say it, we also have to do it with the recognition that in 50 or 100 or 200 years' time, someone's going to look back at us and go, how on earth did they think that was a good idea? So we might want, for example, we could look back at issues around slavery and think, how did the church, how did good Christian believers truly believe that slavery was scripturally ordained, was justified, was within the nature of the God that they worshipped, and the intentions of the God that they worshipped, and they genuinely did. And how could they do that? And I think it's a very salutary reflection, if we're asking those questions, to ask of our own generation, what will people look at us and say, how did they think that that was okay? How did they manage to justify that scripturally? So it is unhelpful to study church history in order to understand ourselves as the culmination of what God is doing. It's a reminder that we're not that. The Spirit is immediate to every generation. And the Spirit is leading every generation from sin into salvation, and from corruption into renewal, and from despair into hope. And us, as well as those in the past and those who will come after us. So we live in the same immediate relation to the Spirit, like as others have done. And the Spirit is at work saving us as much as saving those who've gone before and those who will come after. So if that was why you were coming to do church history, I'm sorry, we're not going to get there. I wanted just to give you a little bit about a couple of resources. There are no shortages of books on church history. You will have no problem finding books on church history. And if you have a special interest, someone's already raised a question, Glenys, you've raised a question, I will try and get back to you. I've got somebody I can ask about that. I will get to you, I hope. If not next time, the time after. If you have a special interest or something you particularly want to know about, let me know and I will see what I can do in terms of helping you find it. But there were a couple that I wanted to highlight for you. Thank you. Come on, there we go. If you haven't come across this book, Dermot McCulloch's A History of Christianity, it is a one-volume history of 3,000 years. Thank you. Because he takes the history of the church back pre the church, which is a very helpful thing. It is a very, very good book. There's an interesting question just come up about Amazon Prime, and I just you may want to have a look at that. There's also, you can find on YouTube the series that Dermot McCulloch did, which is based around this book, which was done for the BBC, and it is available. And he does a really good way of charting a story through. If you've read the book, a lot of what I'm going to say you will already know. If you haven't read the book and you want a really good, serious, solid history, then that is certainly one to look at. Yeah, and as it is, as Judith says, it is more universal than many. The other one that I would recommend, this is more light-hearted but is accurate, and I think it's well worth, if you want a gentle way into church history, having a look at this one, The Nearly Infallible History of Christianity, because what he does in this charts the history of this, but also gives little vignettes about some of the characters that turn up, and helpful things like, would you want to go to the pub with this man? Yet Luther, he says yes. Calvin, he says no. But he kind of takes us through the history of the church, and is quite clear that sometimes the church is just wrong and we got it wrong and we ought to say that. And at other times he notices sometimes very hidden people in whom we can see the glory of the church coming to its fruition. And it's a very much lighter history than the McCulloch one, but it's, I say, it's accurate, and it's well worth reading. I will mention others on the way through, I think, as I go, and certainly if you have special requests, do let me know if there's something you're particularly interested in. I want you I should have maybe done this at the beginning, just a few ground rules for going through the course. Basic Zoom etiquette applies at all times, so please, if you can keep on mute, it just makes life much easier for everybody. It's not so much voices as background noises that come in and can make life quite difficult. I will speak too fast. It is inevitable. It's because I'm so excited about what I do, and also because I've got far too much material and I'm trying to get it in. Please tell me, because I can't hear myself always. So if I see turning up in chat, Ruth, breathe, or words to that effect, I will slow down. When I have smaller classes, I get people to wave at me, or I get my congregation to, but please do tell me. I know I speak too fast, no matter how hard I try. But the more you tell me, the better chance we have of me actually slowing down. I will use dates on the course. If I say a date, please check it. If I have written it down, if it's on the handout or on the screen, it is correct. If I say it aloud, it's probably correct, but it might not be. I have stood in front of a class once and told them quite authoritatively that the Reformation, as we all know, took place in the 14th century. So, you know, when I say things, they don't always get filtered as carefully as they should. If it's written down, I have checked it, so it's okay. But if I say it, please do check it. Don't just assume that it's been correct. Thank you, Kate, for putting up information about the books. And just move this. I would just say there are no stupid questions. If you're needing to ask a question, the chances are somebody else is as well. So if I'm not making sense, or if there's something you want clarified, or if I've assumed knowledge or something, please, please, please don't ever feel it's a stupid question. Somebody, if you want to ask it, somebody else probably needs to ask it, and maybe doesn't have the nerve. So you may be being helpful to somebody by asking a question. That's our next meeting. Before I get to that, I just wanted to say a little bit about the outline of the way in which this course will run. Basically, we'll go in chronologically, but not necessarily in equal shaped chunks. So it's there's a thematic issue, a thematic driver to it as well. We are not going into huge detail, as you will have gathered. I mean, there is just no way of doing what Dermot McCulloch has done in that huge book in 13 sessions. So we're not going into detail, but there will be some zeroing in on some details in order to highlight certain things, particular themes. So, for example, there will be one session on one person when we look at Augustine, because Augustine is such a towering figure in the whole of the Western Church, and to some extent the Eastern, but certainly the Western Church, that none of the rest of it makes sense unless we get something of Augustine. So we'll do a whole session on. He's the only person we'll do a whole session on individually. In others, we'll sort of pick up various things, but we will go through that. And what I would like to do, though I can't guarantee it, given the numbers, I have to say this is much bigger than I expected. What I'd like to do is spend part of the time in input and then have group conversation around some questions, which will be more specific and narrower than the kind we had today. This was just a sort of general getting to know you, really. And then maybe take some of those questions back in plenary and discuss them. That's my intention. We'll see how it actually works out. And we'll see if we can then also take some of the questions on about possibly into further weeks if there are issues that need more addressing. There's some interesting discussion going on here about books and buying books and Amazons and things, and I think that's really helpful. I won't necessarily be going directly into issues around Amazon. The question is, will I be talking about involvement and non-involvement in social and political concerns? Certainly, when we're talking about the medieval church, the whole doctrine, the whole experience of Christendom, then the involvement in church and society is part of that. We'll be looking at that. And then as we're looking at the church 19th and into the 20th century, we will touch on very briefly issues around the way in which the church was or wasn't, and it splits, that there's a division, the way in which the church was or wasn't involved in some political issues. So I hope we might at least give you some pointers for that, and show how this is an issue that we've never really settled, and we've gone on discussing it. There's a Kate, thank you. Kate is reminding us, there we go, that sermon preparation Tuesdays. If you want to come on and know more about that, join up with that. We have about 5 minutes. If there's yes, it's thank you, Kathy. I've had a volunteer and it will be sorted. Thank you. Yes. We have about 5 minutes of this session left. If there are questions that people would like to put into the chat, and we'll see if we can address them, or reflections, or this isn't what I thought I was going to do. Why aren't we doing what I thought I was going to do? You're allowed to ask that. I may or may not have an answer for it. You just see if I can find the question. So if you want to ask anything, please feel free. That's it. I've worn you all out, haven't I? Which is, it will certainly have PowerPoints, and on occasions there will be, that's nice to know, Joanna, there will be links or illustrations when I have them. I'm not a particularly visual person, so I have to work quite hard at that, but I will try and do it if it will help people. Will I touch on the topic of orthodoxy and heresy? Now that's a really interesting one, because these change as we go through the years, and particularly from next week when we're looking at the patristics, the patristic period. What we would now perhaps want to say is heresy at that point is being explored. So it's less to do with there was always something pure available and other people were getting it wrong, and it's more to do with debates and trying to work out what the theology actually was, and oops, we've gone too far that way, we have to pull it back. So we'll be touching on it in that way. So you might want, Tatiana, after we've done that, to reflect on whether it's what you were hoping or wondering about, and we'll see how it emerges through the rest of the course. Okay, that went just a bit too quickly for me there. To gain knowledge or encourage needed change in the church, or question mark? Well, I think that's a question for everybody, really. I mean, that's a question of why you're doing it. I'm hoping to pass on some knowledge. I would certainly, I think the church is constant. I'm enough of a reformer to be, or I'm influenced enough by Luther, for example, to say that the church is always in need of reformation. It is never perfect and always needing to be called back to itself. And I think church history is one of the tools that we have for that, partly because it helps us see where we might have gone wrong, partly because it reminds us what we could be, what we might be. But I think that might be an interesting question to come back to with other people. I will hold on to that, I think, and offer you it back as we get towards the end of the course. Thank you. There we are. There's a list about some of the courses that are coming up, some of the books that might be useful. Documents of the Christian Church, I would certainly recommend if you're wanting to look in detail at things. Differences in doctrine, different denominations. I'm not sure that we'll cover that in great detail. We will look, when we look at some of the movements in the medieval period and some of the reforming movements, we will look at the way in which different doctrines emerge and take shape in different communities and become divisive. But I won't be looking in great detail at them, because that's yes, as far as I know, this is the same Zoom link for every session. That's more of a denominational history rather than an overall church history. Just open up again. God's universal calling, expression of church truth for all ages. Again, I think this will emerge as we go through, and I think this maybe people will come up with different answers to that. The question, will we explore what are God's universal calling, expression of church true for all ages? What's contextual for specific eras and cultures that are always evolving? I think this may be something that we will be part of the discussion in the groups rather than my input, because I'm not entirely sure that I mean, I would call myself a partial historian. I don't think I could claim to be able to say this is God's universal calling. So I think that might be quite an interesting conversation together. Okay. More suggestions for church history. That's really helpful. Thank you. Folks, we are at 9 o'clock and you have been incredibly patient and stuck with it, and I'm very grateful. And I will just put up the final slide, which will remind us of when we are meeting again. So we will meet again on February the 7th. Church Fathers, who they? We will not cover all of the Church Fathers in an hour. We may get a few of the names in, but what I hope we'll do in that session is just get an outline and a bit of a timeline that shows how the issues that the different fathers dealt with, how they came up in, and why they came up when they did, and some of the approaches that were taken. There will be, somebody I think said earlier on, there's going to be more questions than answers. Yes, that strikes me as really good education, frankly, and that's what I'm aiming for. So I'm looking forward, I hope, to seeing most of you again on the 7th, and for those of you who can't make it, then there will be a link. It's yes, there may be some others, Judith, but I'm not sure because they tended not to write stuff. That's the problem. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Thank you very much, everybody.